One of the coolest things about the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the way that plotlines are threaded through multiple films to create something that's greater than the sum of its parts. We know that Marvel Studios is notorious for teasing us with what's to come, and they've almost mastered this by getting people to sit through their credits just to get a 60-second glimpse into what's in their pipeline. But with such a huge number of films and plotlines to keep track of, there's bound to be a few that fall through and just don't get followed up on. How's it going, fellas? I'm Chris.
I'm Jay.
And I'm Easy Cakes.
And today we're going to be going over just a few examples of plotlines that Marvel has teased us with, but to this point in time haven't been fully fleshed out. So without further ado, let's just get into it.
In Avengers Age of Ultron, Thor has a vision of a cloudy-eyed Heimdall who tells him that he will be the end of his people.
You're a destroyer, Odinson.
Now, fans and critics alike generally didn't like his vision scenes because they felt like gratuitous setup. However, in hindsight, they feel even less meaningful, given that Marvel went a very different direction with Thor Ragnarok than what these visions seemed to be setting up. By the end of Age of Ultron, we are left expecting two particular things from the continuation of Thor's adventure: his pursuit of the Infinity Stones, and the coming of Ragnarok. The 2017 film immediately shuts half of that down, with the writers basically telling audiences to disregard the fact that we were told Thor would go looking for the stones.
Oh no, Thor's in a cage. How did this happen?
It's a long story, but basically I'm a bit of a hero.
Searching through the cosmos for some magic, colorful Infinity Stone things. Didn't find any.
In fact, the impression I get is that Thor Ragnarok in general became a very different movie once Taika Waititi got involved.
Hey, take it easy, man.
And while I'm confident these changes were for the better given how good Ragnarok ended up being, it stands that Thor's narrative trajectory before his stint as one of Jeff Goldblum's gladiators on Planet Landfill was likely very different. Even comparing the original announcement logo to what we eventually got feels like proof enough of that. While Ragnarok does technically make good on the prophecy set up in Age of Ultron, Waititi's buddy cop comedy barely lines up with the dreary, ominous Armageddon storyline set up in Whedon's film. While we aren't experts, the impression we were given was that Ragnarok was going to involve a lot of Infinity Stone setup for the next Avengers film. But instead, the movie pretty much does its own thing, and unbeknownst to himself, it is actually Thor's unintentional possession of the Space Stone at the end of the film that sets up the beginning of Infinity War, while still allowing Thor to have his own contained story that wasn't bogged down by being a full-on setup story for future installments. Good old Taika Waititi, letting Marvel have their cake and eat it too since 2017.
Being the first hero to get a film in the MCU, Iron Man had the longest waiting period of solo action compared to his fellow Avengers before finally teaming up with them in 2012, 4 years after the character's introduction. At the end of Iron Man 1, Nick Fury comes to Tony to pitch the Avengers Initiative in one of the most iconic ending credit scenes of all time. However, in 2010's Iron Man 2, it is revealed that Tony declined the offer, and after an entire movie of Tony's out-of-control behavior, S.H.I.E.L.D. rescinds their offer.
Recruitment assessment for Avenger Initiative. Iron Man, yes. I gotta think about it.
Read on.
Tony Stark not recommended?
It sounds like Marvel may have had some redemption arc material planned for Stark, or maybe the threat of alien invasion was going to be the catalyst for S.H.I.E.L.D. putting aside their issues regarding Stark's personality. But this doesn't really go anywhere. Early in the first act of the Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D. is already at Tony's door asking for his help, and while they reference Stark's rejection from Iron Man 2, this point doesn't have any real relevance to the plot. It's not like Marvel was ever going to make an Avengers movie without Iron Man in it, so the decision to end Iron Man 2 pretending that could be up in the air feels like a meaningless misstep. Plus, if they really wanted Iron Man but not Tony Stark, it stands to reason that Rhodey would have made a perfectly fine candidate for the role, and that isn't even hinted as a possibility. This wasn't the last time Marvel played with the idea of separating Tony from the role of Iron Man. The ending of his trilogy concludes with Tony destroying all of his suits after coming to terms with their detrimental effect on his mental health and relationship with Pepper. But by the time Age of Ultron came out, he was right back in the game, and that plot point effectively ended right there. It's hard to imagine Marvel would ever actually follow through on any plans to separate the man from the suit, so we are left wondering why Marvel ever brought up the idea at all, just to kill it immediately.
Set in 1995, Captain Marvel is one of the earliest dated films in the MCU's timeline, second only to Captain America: The First Avenger. This film explores a race war between the shape-shifting Skrull and the blue-skinned militaristic Kree. When the Kree instigated race war begins to fall through on Earth, Yon-Rogg, leader of the Kree Empire Star Force, resorts to nuking planet C-53 by calling in their big guns, the Kree warmonger Ronan the Accuser. Of course, at this point in time, we already know how that debacle turns out for Ronan and the Kree, but we're left with an interesting and foreboding quote from the big blue dude himself.
We'll be back for the weapon.
The core. The woman.
Ronan's situation is unique though in that we've already seen his end in Guardians of the Galaxy, a film set 19 years after the events of Captain Marvel but released 5 years before it. We already knew about Ronan's backstory and his hatred for Xandar and the Nova Empire. We already knew he was strong when we saw him handle 4-time World Heavyweight Champ and 2-time WWE Champ Dave Bautista with ease. And we already knew that he would ultimately meet his end in 2014 at the hands of the guy from Parks and Rec. As it stands though, this leaves the question of whether or not Marvel had actually planned to give Ronan any more screen time beyond his roles in Captain Marvel and Guardians of the Galaxy. Of course, this isn't a confirmed cut yet, since Phase 4 of the MCU is set to roll out later this year. Could we potentially see Ronan make a reappearance in the upcoming Captain Marvel film? Given the circumstances, it just feels like Marvel has written themselves into a corner, because it's hard to see how Ronan could play a significant role in Phase 4, and yet they felt it was important enough to include this line hinting at future conflict. Either way, Lee Pace's Ronan definitely deserves a chance to shine, which is something he hasn't done in the MCU yet.
I'm patient. I can wait.
I oftentimes forget that The Incredible Hulk came out the same year as Iron Man 1, which is probably because I oftentimes forget about The Incredible Hulk. The recasting of the title character and the general disregard for most of the story work done in this film have made it arguably the most brushed aside film in the MCU. Some people have gone so far as to argue that it shouldn't be seen as canon, but lately Marvel has been trying to do better by its sophomore film, with characters like Thunderbolt Ross rejoining the fray in Civil War, and Abomination set to return in the upcoming She-Hulk Disney Plus series. However, there are some story points that have been passed over too hard to retcon back into the established canon in a sensible way. The most prominent of these is the stinger at the end of the film. So in the first solid instance confirming the shared nature of the Marvel films, Tony Stark shows up to a brooding General Ross, and apparently tries to recruit him to the Avengers Initiative.
What if I told you we were putting a team together?
I don't know what Marvel was planning here. Maybe Ross was supposed to find and recruit the Hulk in the Avengers, or maybe the Thunderbolts were a spark in the minds of the people in the writer's room at that time. But regardless of what the plan was, it's obvious that they decided not to go in that direction pretty quickly. We find out in Iron Man 2 that Tony shot down Fury's Avengers pitch in the first movie, and Ross would go on to disappear from the franchise for over half a decade. As a result, this scene really doesn't fit anywhere neatly into the current canon of the MCU, and has become a reminder of a time when this powerhouse of a franchise was still finding its feet.
Next on our list is the first Ant-Man film, debuted in 2015, which, like featured star actor Paul Rudd, is a timeless masterpiece. The first Ant-Man film introduces the Pym Particles to the MCU, a secret formula developed by former S.H.I.E.L.D. scientist Hank Pym. The Pym Particles are subatomic particles, which, put simply, allow one to increase or decrease an object's mass while also being able to strengthen its density. The main plot of the movie is centered around Hank Pym, his daughter Hope, and Scott Lang, attempting to steal the replica of Pym Particles created by Darren Cross, before he can mass-produce them and sell them to dangerous powers such as Hydra. Scott Lang manages to defeat Darren Cross in the end of the film and prevent Cross Industries from mass-producing the formula. However, near the climax of the movie, fans might have forgotten by now or missed that during the do-or-die scramble that takes place in Cross Industries, that one of the bidders in the Mexican standoff actually makes off with one of the vials of Pym Particles. This person in question is revealed to be Mitchell Carson, a S.H.I.E.L.D. executive who is actually a Hydra operative.
Hail Hydra!
As of the current status of the MCU, we have not seen any sign of this plot point further or any more hints of what's going to come from this. Something else of note is the current ambiguous state of Hydra, as it was recently taken down in the previous film, Captain America the Winter Soldier. As we have seen in Ant-Man 2 and even Avengers Endgame, where the Pym Particles take a center role in the story, the idea of an evil organization having access to the power of Pym Particles, which can be used not only for the size-shaping abilities but even potential time travel, can become a very large plotline in the future. As stated earlier, we have not seen any more hints of what's going to come from this, with no news of what Ant-Man 3 will be or any other related works, so we will have to see if Marvel's still cooking this up on the back burner for something big, or this is just one of the many drop plans that have happened in the MCU.
While it's possible some of these plot points could return later down the line, things like Tony Stark's inconsistent relationship with S.H.I.E.L.D. and basically the entire plot of The Incredible Hulk feel like examples of Marvel working out the kinks when their vision of this massive, interconnected universe was still being formulated. If anything, slips like these go to show that no matter how careful you are, no undertaking this massive, involving this many different collaborators, could ever be completely airtight, especially when it's responding and adapting to a growing and changing audience base. For every 10 awesome payoffs this franchise gives us, there seems to be one plot thread that gets lost in the service of the shifting vision of the overall narrative. If you have other plot points that you feel got lost in the fray or significantly changed over the course of development, please let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to subscribe and hit that bell too. But otherwise, have a great day and stay safe.
Yeah? Well, it's time for me to tap out.